Could we start with the genesis of the project, why you decided to write a book?
Because I thought it was a good story. I mean, I've had story in my life, all my life. That's what I've basically done since very early period. And I thought, it's a good story. And the question was, and probably the thing that spurred me on was, could I tell it? And could I, if I did it, could I tell it true? Because it's not a promotional thing. I mean, I have no desire to, in a sense, I'm not disrespectful to the people who do it, but I just didn't want to do a book that, quote, taught anybody anything or said, if you do these things in business or whatever, this is what will happen to you. I just thought it was a good tale.
Are you in a retrospective mood? You're 83 years old. Was that part of the mechanism as well?
No.
No.
No. I just thought it has a good arc, this tale. And well, about retrospective, so to speak, I mean, you do. The amazing thing was, I first thought, I can't remember anything, so, how am I ever going to do this? And then I found that as you dive into this, memories come. Shockingly, you remember things you never ever thought would ever come back to you. And it then flows. And so, since I never really lived in the moment, or ever do live in the moment, being able to live in the old moments was kind of fun for me.
Could we start at the beginning at William Morris, and you talk your way into a job there, an entry-level job there, connect the dots, as you say. What was the magic of that place when you started out there?
Well, for me, since I never wanted to be an agent, it wasn't being an agent. It was that I discovered that they had essentially the entire history of the entertainment business in one room, their file room. And so I manufactured my way into reading the file room. And so I had there's no school in the world as good as being able to read literally for the last, let's see, when I went to William Morris, which is in 1963, 4, something like that, it was 70 years old, basically in the United States, the beginning of what you call modern entertainment, beginning of the film industry, beginning of radio, television, etc. And since they represented most of the people in it, they had their whole histories. So, wow, what could be better?
There's a line in the book in which you say there are people who can't think of you as anything other than a boss, but you were a very good assistant as well. How did you start out at the beginning of your career, kind of from that first job at William Morris? How did you kind of make the jump into management? That was at ABC.
Well, how did I? Basically because when you're a really good assistant, I mean, the other thing about reading a job at William Morris was you got to be the assistant to someone. And being someone's assistant, if you're really good at it and figuring out how to please this person in every way you can think of and master all sorts of detail and process, was just a great, it's like the earliest DNA of kind of business life if you get to, without responsibility, observe someone who has responsibility and play a little minor role in it. But if you're curious, you just get to suck up so much. So it was all these things were just great building blocks.
Going to ABC, you're in your 20s and you sell the network on effectively a franchise, a Movie of the Week franchise. And there's a lot of...
Well, we never thought of it as a franchise.
It became one, though.
Well, yeah, something, if it's successful, gets to have other definitions. But when we started with the idea, it was just something that no one had ever done before and everyone thought would fail, which is why this 25-year-old was left alone, basically, to do it.
Inherent in that is confidence or hubris. And where does that come from? What made you able to do that, to put it together, to think you could do it and then assemble this?
I don't know that I'm not so sure I ever had confidence. I don't think I've ever had confidence.
Really?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think it's the lack of confidence that, at least in my case, made me somewhat effective. But The thing about something like that is, because I had certainly no experience. Well, no one had any experience. No one had done it before. So I got to learn it as doing it, and building, with me as the first kind of employee of it, eventually probably got up to thousands of people involved in that enterprise. If you start it, I think this is great good luck of anybody who kind of starts anything from quote zero, is you end up learning every job. I mean, until it gets to be of scale, but you learn every essential job because you're actually doing it. So if it becomes successful, you have a chance at being kind of a better manager than the next dope just because of that.
I know you said you didn't set out to write a business book or a teaching book, but there are lessons that you can draw from a lot of these anecdotes about your approach to
Possibly.
management and deal making and the industry more broadly. How did you learn how to manage? You're self-taught in many ways, but how did you figure out what works?
The definition of it is really what I just said without being too redundant, which is if you learn every job because you are doing every job, you are the head of marketing, you are the head of sales, you are the head of affiliate relations, you are every task, and also every creative aspect of it in the very beginning. If you do those things, you then know how to manage other people doing those things. Whereas if you come in at more senior levels, you only learn to manage top down rather than bottom up. And bottom up is the only thing that I think produces anything valuable until you get some expertise and then you are able to direct other people.
Do you retain that level of engagement? In other words, do you want to be involved in everything all the time, or are you just content knowing what's happening?
Once it becomes a success, I basically lose interest. So I'm not a good shepherd of things, that things are already kind of succeeded. I want to move on to the next challenge or to the next thing that I'm curious about, or the next thing that's kind of unknown. So I don't sustain.
Did you like the creative mechanics of it? Did you like being on sets, for instance?
Well, unless there's a particular reason to be on a set, nothing could be more either both uninteresting and purposeless. I mean, if you need to go to a set to say to principally a director, you got to do something else, or let's take another direction, or let's think about something specific. And on set's not the best place to do it anyway. But if you have to go, you go. Otherwise, what would you're just an extra.
I asked you about the magic of William Morris. Could you describe what ABC was like at the time you were there? You had three networks.
ABC was the most junior of the networks. CBS and NBC had invented basically radio, and so ABC was the tag along when it entered television, because while ABC, the progenitor of ABC, was I think in radio in some form, but it was the number 3 of only 3 networks. So it was kind of the hip shooting. It would try anything just to get attention. And it was kind of run like a candy store, which is why they would give a 25-year-old immense responsibilities, because there was no bureaucracy to stop him. So it was a remarkable place. If you wanted responsibility, it was just there. You just go do it. Nobody said, "Hey, wait a minute, kid, just go back into your room and come to us 20 years from now."
We've talked about how you learned to manage, and you also had to learn a lot about the creative process as well. Are you an inherently creative person?
No,
Do you consider yourself
inherently creative. I never thought so. I mean, certainly I always had, this word creative, I always had very strong opinions and instincts about things, particularly in entertainment. And once I learned the tools, and I started out thinking, God, I could never do this creative thing. I'd be just a really great assistant, but I could never actually be the person who did that stuff, editorial decision making. But I found that I was confident, whether I was I was okay at it, but that I found that I was confident with my instincts. And I was, one other thing, which was I was willing, passion in creative affairs is all that really matters. I mean, if you're a total dope, passionate about something stupid is terrible, but if you're not that, then the difference between you and the other person is both your ability to be willful and the ability to argue creatively out of passion. And out of that kind of creative conflict comes some good things, also comes some big mistakes, but it's okay.
Talk a bit more about that. So what that kind of confrontational creative argument is like.
Well, I think that, I don't know where it came from, but I like noisy argument, and I like people arguing out of passion. And as I said, I don't know where it came from, but I have an ability to listen in a peculiar, it's not so peculiar actually, but it's my way, which is, I'm sure shared by some, which is out of that cacophony of argument, I can hear something. And when I hear it and it rings true to me, I grasp onto it for life. And it doesn't come out of my creative brain necessarily. It comes out of hearing something in argumentative settings, which is, for many people, they don't like that because they don't like confrontation. But I do like it because I think it's a fair arena. So listening, being able to listen and hear out of usually someone's, not always out of passion, but hearing something that really rings solidly true to you is the only way, is the best way to find good stuff.
Is there a Barry Diller sensibility as you look back on all the places you've been? No.
No, I think what there is, again, lucky, because, in the range of people's interests, as we know, some people, whole groups of very slivers of people are interested in, pigeons walking in Antarctica, or other abstruse kinds of things. I have kind of a mainstream sensibility, and I also have a guard against cynicism, and I want to hold on to naivete. And so those things put me kind of in a mainstream, broad mainstream, rather than on the outskirts of things. And that kind of often has resonance with larger numbers of people.
You've straddled these worlds of TV and movies and more, of course, but with those two, when you moved from ABC to Paramount, you were often flagged as a TV guy.
Yeah.
What did that mean then, and how did you shake that off?
I got into the movie business when I was 32, at the most senior.
So all impossible age. I mean, it's crazy to think you were incredibly young in all of these roles.
Yeah, I was. And now I'm incredibly old in all these roles. But when I was essentially the youngest at these things, then, I kind of had the ability again, because television at that time was looked down by everybody in the movie business. It was the inferior medium. The movies were the glamorous, of course, during this time, which is the 70s and 80s. Movies were not at their apogee, which was probably in the 30s and 40s when they totally dominated. But it was our most important cultural export, and it kind of led the large stream interests of, let's say, certainly the American people. So, and it was, it and the people in it were kind of snotty, not kind of, wildly snotty about anyone who came from television. And I was the first person, literally, to come from television into the movie business. And so, at an executive situation. And so there were two aspects of this. One was, again, people kind of left me alone because they said, well, this television kid's going to fail quickly. And that was good, because if you're left alone when you're trying to change things, that's kind of good. And the second thing was that I like very much being the underdog. And so that was how I entered the movie business, which is just unique at that time.
Let's talk a bit about data. And I gather you hate data.
I don't hate data. No, I don't hate it
How
at all.
do you use it, I guess,
I
is a
like
way into
it.
this.
I like it factually. What I don't like is anything that is supposedly predictive of future events.
Or of audience taste.
Based upon, certainly you can't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the amounts that have been time wasted and spent in trying to divine what audiences will like and not like is this grandest waste of time and misleadingness. And the other thing that research does is, if you're in the world of creating product, you live in an insecure environment. There's no way to make yourself secure. It is by definition insecure for all obvious reasons. So data is used by these people, literally like old witch doctor stuff, to make people feel secure that they can bolster all they got, which is their instinct and opinions, with all this data drivel, to tell them whether they should go left, right, or center, and make them feel more secure in doing so. It's just a grand waste of time.
Have there been moments in which you've had to say to colleagues or investors, you got to trust me and trust my gut? And what's that negotiation like for groups of people who want things to be more, I guess, grounded in data than that?
I don't know. I've really never had to do that I can think of. I mean, I think today, though, if I were doing it today, if I were in those more junior positions where I was just so lucky that I got to do most of these things that hadn't been done before by myself, basically because no one else wanted to touch them. But I don't know. I think that it's that you kind of benefit from you benefit from being on your own in this process. It's just, I don't know, a better track.
Reading the book, I was surprised that you had no grand vision for where you were going or what was next, that serendipity played such a key role in the kind of arc or evolution of your career.
I think it's the most, it's it isn't actually very overused. It's very underused for its vast importance, at least in my life. It is the things that happen in my life. Now, maybe everybody has those same things, and I think they do at different levels. My serendipitous moments were gargantuan and inexplicable. You could not have predicted by any odds or anything that I would be in this certain place at this certain moment when that certain thing happened. And that those serendipitous stars aligned in so many instances in my life. It's a form of magic, it's a form of celestial whatever. And of course, people say, well, yes, but it depends what you do with it and all that. And of course, that's true. But it is inexplicable if, literally, a tiny example, if at the moment I decided at 23 that I had to get out of William Morris because they would fire me very soon because I had outstayed my welcome.
And you didn't want to be an agent.
I didn't want to be an agent,
right.
So I was no value to them. Not that they were paying me anything, but and the day that I left William Morris to join ABC in what I thought was the role of the assistant to a middle-level manager at ABC, that day they fired the czar of ABC, and they reached down and they picked my guy to be the head of ABC. So I went from being in the West Coast, little middle management area, to move to New York, to become the assistant to the head of the place. And within 6 months, I was kind of running the program department. I mean, where does that come from? Now, yes, I could have done it, had that opportunity, and then flopped. But just that serendipitous moment, and I have like a number of those.
You worked with some incredible luminaries from old Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
How much did you set out to model your life and career after them?
I don't model anything.
No.
No. I mean, I learned enormous amounts.
Yeah.
I mean, but act like somebody else. I'm not a terrible actor, but I'm not that good. But I was lucky enough, again, pure luck, that when I started at ABC basically and started to buy movies from these movie studios and dealt with these old guys who were in their twilight, kind of the end of their careers, but they were really kind of the founders of the movie business. And I got to know them because I was the person buying their company's movies. So just that experience of knowing those great characters was fantastic.
What do you think they thought of your youth at the time?
Probably, listen, the only reason they paid any attention to me is because I had a checkbook. And they needed that checkbook because the movies were, in difficult straits during that period of time, basically because of television, but television had the money. So they had to pay attention to me. So I'm sure, I can't imagine that these old great moguls would have liked at that time, even 24, 25, 26-year-old kid having kind of power over them. But since, what could they do?
There's this moment of kind of professional determinism for you. You've been running a studio, and you want to. The nagging question is, can you do this on your own? Do something on your own, make something on your own.
Yes.
Could you talk a bit about how you wrestled with that? Because in the arc of the book, this is a time that's difficult for you to figure out sort of what you're doing and how long you can kind of meditate or muse on that and figure out what's next.
I think it comes down to, for me, and it was a thing in my head taped that just wouldn't stop, which was either you are or you aren't. And it was either you are capable of being independent from the mothership, so to speak, from corporate life and being on your own, or you're not. It's very binary. You can do the things that almost all executives do or employees do, which is to rationalize this way or that way, or do whatever about risk or any of those things. But when you finish with all of that, it really is definitional. And it's the thing, that tape that ran, that really was what forced me out, which was I could not allow it to be that I wasn't. So I forced myself to be. And that was just a yearn for independence and for being able to see what I could create on my own without being under a corporate life.
You very early on took an interest in the internet. What was it about it that sparked your interest at the time? Pure curiosity.
Yeah. Well, I'd never seen a screen. I only knew screens from being used to tell stories, and I came upon screens that were very primitive in the early 90s, but they were interactive. In other words, you acted with something that you saw on a screen. It was not passive, like just watching a story or whatever. And I didn't know, of course, I didn't know what was to become of it. I didn't know that in 3 years from then, there would be this thing called the internet that people would start to use. But that interactivity fascinated me. And I was, again, timing and circumstance. I was lucky enough to be there kind of just before it happened and be curious about it. So I got to learn about it at the earliest stage. So when it started, I had a kind of advantage.
We started off talking about you kind of rummaging around the William Morris file room. as you were writing this and rummaging around your personal archive, were there things that surprised you, things that you remembered that you'd forgotten that stand out, either collaborations you had or projects that you're particularly
most
proud
of the things that are, look, I've had, a lot of my life has been documented because of the businesses that I've been in, and so there's a lot of facts that I could have gotten, and those are obvious. But it was the things that I remembered that weren't written down anywhere, that I was just surprised that I could remember all these actual little storylets, tales inside this business life. And that was fun.
We've talked a lot about your professional life, and I think to a T, as I've mentioned, I'm doing this interview, folks have asked me, everyone's asked me, did you address your personal life in the book? Was that a dilemma or a debate for you as you wrote it?
Not at all. I mean, it's a debate today only because I'm so surprised. I am kind of surprised, I'm still kind of naive, that it seems to be kind of the, it's the catnip that the media pulls. And to me, it's not only a news story or whatever, because a lot of my life has never been a secret. But when I started writing it, I said the only way to do it is to tell the truth, and I set out to tell my story of my life. So I had to tell my life, so I did. And I don't regret it. I stand, silly word. I'm respectful, whatever. Everything that is in the book, that sounds stupid, I guess. So what do I really mean by that? That I stand behind. And proud, I don't like that word either. So I've written the book, and I like what I've written. And anybody can interpret it any way they like or do whatever, but I don't know how currently, only because I'm getting a lot of media attention since this started to creak out a week or so ago with an excerpt that ran in New York and some other stuff. And it just makes me feel, although I'm not so totally a fool as to not think that I would be, quote, my life would be exposed, but it's a bit uncomfortable. But you know what? I did do it.
You write about this contrast between you and your wife, that she's a public figure and her business is entirely wrapped up in that. And you've led a very public life in many ways, but you've been kind of assiduously private as well.
I like privacy, and I respect privacy in others, and for many reasons, partly because I actually like it as a quality, and partly because privacy protected me in things that I was fearful of. But in contrast, my wife is her brand. And so her life has been, every aspect of it has been public since she's 20 years old. So she's utterly comfortable with it, and I'm utterly uncomfortable, but we'll see how it goes.
Reading the book, I was struck how in your younger life, you almost didn't allow yourself to have a personal life. It was a thing that you had to, I think suppress is the wrong word, but you were so focused on your professional life.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who over-index in business, sacrifice isn't really, could be the word, but isn't really the word for me, but is that you don't have room. If you're working and obsessed with working, it crunches down to here the amount of time or interest you have in almost anything else.
One last question on this point, and that is there are a couple of moments in the book where you suggest that you could have said more about your private life sooner, and maybe that would have made a difference, and that you regret that. Do you
regret
feel
it
that way?
Well, first of all, it's so many years later now, and no one, I think, other than media, I don't think anybody really cares. It's not about people's sexuality. But I would have liked to have had more courage to make declarations. I did not lead a secret life. I just refused to make declarations. And I wish And I think that was a lack of courage. I wish I had had it. I didn't.
If we could, just in the last few minutes we have, I'd love to ask you just about the moment that we're in now.
What
so
about
stepping
it?
away from the book, book a little bit.
What about it?
But for you as a CEO, we're at a moment now where no doubt you're wrestling with all of the uncertainty that we see in this country and around the world. And I say as a CEO, I should set the context better. So IAC doesn't have a permanent CEO now. I imagine you're doing a lot more work with the business now.
A little more.
A little more. Let me reframe that. But
that's all right.
As an executive, I imagine you're dealing with a lot of the uncertainty on all fronts. How are you seeing through that, trying to make sense of it at this point?
Well, I think, this is a period, I think its time parameters are 3-6 months maybe. We're in a very unique moment of instability because of everything that has been shoved on the table by this administration. And will it work out or not? Now, I think the time limit for it either working out or not, particularly in trade, is very short, a few months. It'll either be pulled through or it will be an abject failure and be pulled back. So I think right now, it's extremely difficult for people in business to make decisions that go beyond this period until they see what conditions are going to be. So it's an odd time.
The president has floated tariffs on filmmaking, overseas filmmaking.
Yes.
Any sense in that as you see it, and what would the ramifications be if they were to be put in place?
On that, no. On the overall trade stuff, I'm willing to give, he got elected, I'm willing to give the administration the ability to, how do I say it rightly? I'm certainly willing to give them the time to pull it through without unduly trashing it or criticizing it. I doubt it'll work out, but I hope I'm wrong. I also hope that if I'm right, it just ends quickly, and if I'm wrong, hallelujah, everything's great. So I think that's the kind of gearage that I bring to this, but I think that it's got, unless it's all resolved quickly, it's got so many downstream terrible consequences in the negative that I just want it resolved.
You're someone I think of as a deal maker, and we were all promised that we'd have a looser regulatory environment and we'd see happy days again when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, and we haven't seen that. We have a president going through the Middle East, signing memoranda of understanding, et cetera, et cetera. But what's it going to be that catalyzes more deals? Is it getting through this uncertainty about trade?
I think you have, look, you asked me the question about the movie stuff, about the movie tariffs. The problem, and it was related to talking about Hollywood, the LA-based community that historically has all the centralized expertise in every craft of making television or films, and that centricity has moved elsewhere. The reason is not because of foreign competition. That's not the issue. The issue is that the California-based, LA-based, California state and local LA city have not offered the kind of incentives that everybody else has offered.
Other states,
other cities, other places, and not those necessarily so much outside the United States, although the significance of those. Taxing or tariffing them ain't going to solve that problem. The only way to solve that problem is to have incentives in that one unique place of creation.
There's a moment in the book where you write about how you're at ABC and the overarching ethos is don't do anything to upset the FCC. And that had to do with fairness and
the great fairness doctrine.
All of that now.
No, the fairness doctrine, which is a wonderful thing, and Reagan really discarded it, and it is something that was very lovely to protect. It's been discarded.
Explain that a bit more, why you think it's a loss that we don't have it now.
What the fairness doctrine said is that you had to have balance in anything you reported. It wasn't that you could certainly take an opinion, but you had to offer a contrary opinion. It had to be balanced. It had to be, in that word, fairness, meaning that you had to see all sides of it. And why is that important? What could be more important than, that's the thing that allows the center to hold. If you have argument here and argument here, the center tends to hold. But if you have argument only going this way and only going that way, that's particularly for broad arenas of communication. So I think it's a great loss.
There's now an issue with broadcast networks essentially having to genuflect to the FCC when it comes to...
Well, that's just, look, I'm sorry that this is, well, this too will pass in a few years, I would think, but politicizing the FCC is a crime. I mean, it's simply a crime. Saying that broadcasters or people whose licenses the FCC holds should be subject to political determinization as led by the chair of the FCC, delving into matters of suitability, whether or not in the paramount, which is being withheld from approval, or not withheld, but being determinative soon for approval, as to whether or not they, in a single episode of 60 Minutes, and a lawsuit, utterly absurd lawsuit, filed directly personally by the president against CBS,